Thank you all for coming to this afternoon session on Asking the User, incorporating user-centered customizations and features into Yale's ArchivesSpace PUI, or Public User Interface. So what we're going to do this afternoon is the three of us are going to speak for 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to do 3 breakout groups for discussion, and each of us will lead one of those discussion groups. We're going to have a user experience testing station here where the 3 computers are, Alicia. And then we're going to have a process and workflow Q&A group, which Stephanie will be leading. Eve's going to be leading the testing one, and then I'll lead a group discussing vendor and developer liaising and collaborating. So I'm going to go ahead and note too that all the information that we're about to share is in a resource folder. I think the mouse is just a little laggy. There we go. And the resource folder link is at the bottom of the slides. It's bit.ly/Yale with capital Y, PUI, all capital letters. Okay, so as Kim mentioned, we are members of the Yale ArchivesSpace Public User Interface implementation team, representing 2 of those work groups, 2 of the work groups that were responsible for implementing the PUI. And as you can see from this slide, that team is actually considerably larger than just the 3 of us. There were 6 different work groups charged with contributing to the project through data work, branding and promotion, technical integrations with other production systems at Yale, and staff training and documentation. So our 2 work groups are at the bottom of the slide here. Stephanie and I were on the settings and enhancements work group, which was responsible for identifying and then sort of like shepherding changes to the interface. And then Eve was the team lead for the usability and accessibility work group, which was charged with doing user testing and other user-centered work to figure out what users really needed out of the PUI. And we just wanted to mention too, there are a lot of folks involved in this obviously who couldn't be here today, so we wanted to give them a shout out both to our specific team members and also to our project manager, Melissa Wisner, and our ex officio person, Mark Custer, who many of you know. I also do want to shout out the folks from Lyrasis as well, especially Mark Cooper, Christine and Laney, who were just absolutely invaluable to us throughout this process. So, and I'll just mention too, just at Yale, we had more than 30 people working on this, so it was really a considerable team effort. It's like working Okay. All right, so we just wanted to give you a little bit of local institutional context. Yale implemented ArchivesSpace in 2014, and since then we've onboarded 10 libraries, archives, and museums across campus to using ArchivesSpace. Previously we were using a variety of different things, including Archivist Toolkit, local things and whatnot. Now we're much more streamlined in one system, which is great. And we also document our work in the Yale ArchivesSpace user manual, which some of you may have used, the YAMS LibGuide, and the ArchivesSpace at Yale blog. And those are all linked in the slides. Okay, so going back. Sure. I thought the mouse was working, but it was actually just magic. So a little bit more about our institutional context. Our archival data lives in a variety of places. Prior to implementing the PUI, which by the way, we're still not live, we're hoping to go live around Labor Day. So right now, status quo is that we produce and maintain archival data in ArchivesSpace, and then we distribute that data through MARC in our library catalog, through EAD as XML, EAD as HTML, and EAD as PDF. And the primary way that we distribute archival data is the EAD as HTML through the Yale archival, or the Yale Finding Aid database, YFAD. As you can see, I think you should be able to see this pretty well. It's an older platform. It was implemented in 2008, and development has been stagnant on it for 5 or 6 years, for a good while. So we really haven't had a lot of change in recent institutional memory around how we discover archival material. So there's a lot of strong institutional expertise about using YFAD and preference around search and discovery. And YFAD is also quite heavily used. In a typical month, we get over 10,000 searches and over 30,000 finding aid views. So we're getting a lot of traffic on this platform that is not necessarily no longer able to handle what we need from it. So in general, we wanted to maintain service offered in YFAD and also add desired features and functionality, and also simplify our lives a little bit, of course, in being in the PUI, which is where we're already creating and maintaining archival data. So our goals for the PUI were to increase user experience with and improve user experience with discovery and access to archival material, to launch a holistic service integrated with our production systems, to bring a new level of service to finding aids in ArchivesSpace, to leverage significant local expertise, which we've done by involving dozens of folks on campus, to improve integration with the library's federated search tool, to create the potential for more connections with other institutions and data on the wider web, and to provide new pathways and contextual connections for discovery. Just for example, discovery via creators, which is something that we can't do at the moment in YFAD. So throughout this process of thinking about how to achieve these goals, we identified and informed stakeholders via regular community forums and email communications. We also, I'll note too that we also examined and monitored search behavior, but we sort of, in conversation with lyricists, we determined that search was sort of outside of the realm. We were keeping an eye on it, but we weren't really able to get nitty-gritty within the tool itself. So, I'm doing this. So our priorities and questions ahead of testing. First, we wanted to leverage staff expertise, which we did by having the settings and enhancements work group that Stephanie and I participated in review the PUI and sort of identify some obvious changes that we wanted to make. We also solicited what we called model search cases from Yale University Library staff. So we asked folks to contribute searches that they might do helping patrons or part of their daily lives. That way we could test those searches against both YFAD, which also does not have the best search behavior in the world, to give us a benchmark, and then different iterations of the PUI. Let's see. Oh, and then we also began hearing from users, and that's really what we're going to focus on for most of this presentation. We started by gathering feedback via user interviews with select populations, undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, outside researchers, and library staff. And then based on those user interviews, we created a list of desired outcomes, and then we tested those expected and desired outcomes. And we're going to go quite into detail with how that went and what our process was for it. Okay, so in the settings and enhancements work group, we really began by educating ourselves and getting to know the PUI. So we familiarized ourselves both with the PUI itself, and then also we got a sense of what could be changed by us in like settings and sort of like easier to fix local changes, by us with development work, and then by our vendor, lyricists. That took actually quite a lot of work to untangle. I'll note that at Yale, we didn't have dedicated developer support in-house. So, and we are hosted by lyricists as well. So we were working within a specific institutional context, but it took us a while to sort of get a sense of how to go about making changes. We also collaborated with colleagues quite a bit. We gathered feedback from staff members across the Yale repositories, and we served as stakeholder ambassadors to make sure that throughout the process, those folks were really able to weigh in on what they needed out of the PUI. We also examined PUI-based and non-PUI-based search and discovery interfaces for features of interest that we might want to add. And throughout this entire process, we worked really closely with the usability and accessibility work group to make sure that we were bringing in not just our own like local staff expertise, but also user feedback. So our approach to making changes was to first look at PUI, get to know it, and then conduct user testing and analysis, review and interpret the results from testing, and then make decisions about next steps. So I'll mention, we identified many changes that we either wanted to make or that were suggested to us or were suggested in user testing. And we had to triage all of that, which Stephanie's going to talk about. And so the way that we're going to try to structure the rest of this presentation is really focusing on our process and also tracing a few select issues that we identified as like changes that we wanted to make. And those issues are going to be inherited description for scope and content notes in the PUI, the use of jargon and language, options for sharing descriptive data with our users, and how to indicate contextual search results, which is if someone uses a search term and then gets a list of results, like how do they know why they're getting those results? How do we communicate that to them? So those are the 4 things that we're going to go through, and we're going to start now with you talking about the testing process.
Okay, so as Alison mentioned, we chose to conduct usability testing because our own professional experience with users can really only go so far into understanding what our users' needs are. Usability testing is really essential to ensure that the PUI is both intuitive and easy to use for all users. So during this process, we are also working towards meeting Yale's website accessibility policy, which requires the site to comply with Web Accessibility Content Guidelines, or WCAG 2.0 level AA. So this was a new policy at Yale that was enacted this spring, and it goes into effect for all new websites that come up after September, or including September and after September 2018. So that includes our PUI. So because the goal of the site is to increase collection accessibility for all users, the site really needs to be an open and accessible design. And real-world user experience stories give weight to the changes we want to make, help us prioritize changes, as Alison said, and helps us ID bugs, flaws, and other usability issues or stumbling blocks that we may not see as staff members. So instead of making assumptions about how our users work and understand the system, testing shows us what users see and how they see it. And usability testing can also show positive responses, which was really helpful for us in squashing a lot of internal fears about changing systems. As Alison said, our YFAD, the Yale Finding A database, has been around for a while. So usability testing can, so those positive responses can also be very helpful, and we were looking for those as well, not just looking for the changes we needed to make. We wanted to conduct testing before deciding on any changes and enhancements because we didn't want to do too much work on the out-of-the-box PUI before we got that information. And ideally, we would have liked to have begun this testing back in the fall when we started this project, but some other factors played into our timing. So the PUI had to meet some basic functionality requirements before testing, so testers didn't just keep running into bug after bug. And we also needed students and faculty to be around, to be testers for us. So we had to do the testing during a semester, and it had to be during a part of the semester where they weren't too busy. So not the first couple weeks and not the last couple weeks of the semester. So, thanks. As Alison mentioned, before testing, we defined the PUI's basic functions and target population. We decided that users will need to be able to identify what the PUI is, who it's for, and what it can do. Users should also be able to find collections relevant to different types of search terms and locate materials they already know about. Finally, they will need to use the PUI to request material in Yale's reading rooms. So this is a function we currently have in YFAB through connections to AON. We chose to conduct qualitative facilitated usability testing because we did not really have the time or resources for professional scientific quantitative study. And we needed to do this quickly with a small team, and we needed to be able to easily repeat the process as our site improved. So facilitated testing, where one of us is present in the room during the test, makes it really easy to troubleshoot technical issues and helps create a much richer test because you can prompt the user for more responses. Plus, we wanted to collect real user stories that teach us about users' mental models. So the term mental model is used a lot in usability discussions. A mental model is what the user believes about the system and its functionality. And it can be based on a user's education, background, experience, expectations, and experience with other sites especially. Steve Krug's books about DIY usability testing, especially Rocket Surgery Made Easy, served as really helpful guides for us during this process, especially because I was brand new to usability testing when we started this. And he provides a lot of sample test scripts and other resources that make this process really, really easy. Our first step was to take our defined site functions and turn them into actual tasks for our test participants to do. Each task was presented with motivational context, and we tried to mimic what a real-world search would feel like. We really wanted our testers to be interested in what they were doing and to have some motivation. So we gave them a little scenario to play out. We then had to find our test participants. So an earlier usability test in the fall showed us that novice users don't really have much to say about the system because they have real no context for its use. So we were really looking for participants with at least a little bit of primary source research experience, and that really helped us get more concrete and richer responses in our testing. So in February, once the semester was underway, we reached out to students and faculty that we had worked with in the past, and we asked them to recommend other people. We then sent out a recruitment email, and we promised a $10 Amazon gift card for every person who took a test. So it's really important to compensate your testers for their time. And we explained what they should expect ahead of time. We especially made sure to explain that we would be testing the website and not them. So in school, you take a lot of tests. This is not the type of test that you can fail. So that was really important to emphasize. A team of 4 library staff members took turns facilitating tests, which we held in private rooms. We asked users to bring their own laptops so that the test would simulate a real-world research process, and we wouldn't run into any technical difficulties with an unfamiliar computer. We all read off of the same script and asked users to conduct the same exact tasks in the same order. We also recorded each test using Zoom, a video conference software that Yale already subscribed to, so it was free for our process. And testers signed a consent form to have their voice and on-screen actions recorded. During the test, the facilitator walked the user through each of the tasks and encouraged them to think out loud as they explored the PUI. Tests were then uploaded to the cloud and stored for later analysis. And recording each test like this freed up facilitators to ask probing questions as opposed to leading questions, so they didn't have to take notes. And then they could also encourage testers to voice their reactions when they saw a physical reaction but didn't hear a reaction. In our first round of testing, we conducted 16 tests with 2 to 3 tests in each of our 5 user groups. We conducted one test also with a screen reader user to put some real-world usability testing behind our efforts toward accessibility. We ended up losing 2 recordings to technical errors because, as we all know, these things happen a lot. So we were really happy that we ended up conducting more tests than we had originally planned for that we actually needed. The next step in the process was to watch the tests and synthesize user responses into recommendations for improving the interface. We split up watching the tests to make sure that each test was watched by at least 2 different team members because, as we all know, we all see different things and bring different things to the recordings. So it's really helpful to get that varied perspective in the analysis so you get a more objective analysis. As we watched, we took notes and used a collaborative spreadsheet, actually Google Sheets, for coding each test. And we separated our notes into categories, mostly divided up by parts of the site, but plus a few other categories like jargon and language, as Alison mentioned, and things like frustration, delight, confusion, to note areas that triggered these types of reactions. So coded in a shared spreadsheet helped us compare different users' reactions to the site against one another, and we were able to recognize patterns. Most of our users gave similar feedback, and were confused or happy with really the same components on the site. We originally assumed that our different user types would respond to the site in different ways, like that maybe faculty might respond differently than undergraduate students. But really in practice, there was a lot of similarity across all those user types. One thing that the testing showed was that most users found the site much easier to use than Wi-Fi. Yay, that's the goal. This was true even though there were many design elements that did not match their mental models. So users were most confused or frustrated by search relevancy and behavior, which, as Alison said, we were anticipating that. And a bit by navigation, but mostly driven by the fact that a lot of the links and components of the site were hard for them to see due to some kind of visual design elements. Most of our users also asked, where is the finding aid? Our current database, as Alison explained, is called the Yale Finding Aid Database, so it has the term finding aid in the title. So we've clearly trained our Yale users really well to look for these words. And in the out-of-the-box PUI, the term finding aid only appears once in the finding aid administrative information note. So a lot of people would go to that and say, oh, is this the finding aid? Where's the finding aid? I don't know where the finding aid is. And as we anticipated also, users were confused by that inherited scope and contents and language notes. And in fact, this was an issue for every single one of those 16 users that we tested with. So when an ARCHIVAL object did not have its own scope and contents notes or language notes, the PUI displayed the notes that were available at the next level up, wherever those notes are. So this could be a subseries note, or you could have, in a minimally processed collection, a file level ARCHIVAL object that has a collection level note displaying for it. So our users, as you can see from these quotes, were pretty confused about seeing these inherited notes, and they got really lost, thinking that even though they had clicked on something and moved on to another archival object that they were looking at the same thing they started with. And they became very frustrated because they kept seeing those same notes over and over again and weren't getting any new information. Testing also brought up a number of language issues, many language issues. We all know that using jargon professionally can be very tricky because it interferes with our efforts towards archival transparency. But for example, I already mentioned that users were looking for the words finding aid and they didn't really see it anywhere. They were also really confused by the term container inventory. So we've all been moving, especially with ArchivesSpace, towards the use of container instead of box. But our users are still looking for box and they're still looking for box lists. So that was a big issue. We didn't anticipate a lot of these jargon issues, but as you can see, even simple word choices like this caused a lot of confusion and made a lot of users feel really lost. Sorry, got a stuck page here. I'll get it eventually. There we go. Another issue we anticipated was a need for search results that display search terms in context, as Alison mentioned. Part of the problem here was mostly due to search relevancy issues, but many users made comments like, I don't know why this is here. It must be relevant to my search because it's showing up, but I have no idea why it's relevant. And a few users actually suggested that seeing their search terms appear in context under each result, like the way Google results shows, would help explain why that item came up and would allow them to easily scan the search results. So that suggestion came directly from users. These are just a few examples that came out of our first round of testing, and since we're always working on improving and making iterative changes during this whole process, we were able to respond pretty quickly to some of these results with some site customizations, including Yale skinning, language changes, and moving around a few page elements. After a few of these changes, we ran a second round of usability testing just recently in June. And by this time, our AON request plugin was ready to go. It was being developed by an outside developer. And so we were able to test that requesting function that we weren't able to test to begin with. Our second round of usability testing was also a lot smaller and was the first step towards a habit of iterative testing that we're hoping to start. So the idea being that with a process and script already in place, it'll be very easy to repeat this process with an additional 2 to 3 users each time we make big changes to the PUI. In this round, we used exactly the same method and test script, except we changed, as you can see, just the last task. So for one that prompted users to place actual requests for material. In this round, we ran a total of 6 tests with undergrads, graduate students, and staff members. We then used the same process to analyze the data with an added focus on that response to requesting. With 2 rounds of testing completed, we compiled all our findings and user feedback into a report organized by the same categories we used to code the test, so different parts of the website. And we wrote up a few recommendations for each category. Since the settings and enhancements workgroup, Alison and Stephanie's group, were responsible for making the final recommendations, recommendations in the report were based directly on user feedback and comments from users. Other than some of the results I already mentioned, like language, search, and visual appearance, there were a number of web accessibility issues that arose, and some of these were also usability issues because, as many of us know, when you improve accessibility, you really improve usability for all users. For example, the filters that appear on the right side of the screen, users expected to see them on the left. And because when we scan a piece of paper or a website, our eyes scan in like an F-shaped pattern, so a little bit across on the top and really scanning down the left side of the screen. And actually, a screen reader user uses a screen reader the same way in scanning the test. So the screen reader scans down the left side of the screen. So our test participant who was using the screen reader missed everything on the right side of the screen because he didn't expect to kind of move across the screen in that way to get that important navigation information. So accessibility issues were really a major sticking point for us, and the report emphasized the need to address these before our site launches. Reporting out our results from testing was really an important step in this process. And we finished this work by sharing our report with our other members of our implementation team, stakeholders at Yale, and of course with you guys, the wider ArchivesSpace member community. I think I sent that out a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully you saw it. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'll be talking about the next steps after Eve's group completed the usability testing. How did we interpret the data, and how did we triage those issues and make decisions about how we were going to update the PUI. Okay, so this is basically what our group did to become familiar with the results and kind of begin the decision-making process. So we made sure that we read the report that Eve's group put out. We watched a few of the usability videos. We did a line-by-line comparison of the issues that we had identified before testing and then merged them with issues that came up during testing so we could track similar issues together. And then we ran our own additional tests to uncover issues that usability testing might not have brought out. And then we, go back. And then we prioritized these issues into tiers, and these were a few of the things that we considered. User confusion and user delight. Is this something that users are using very frequently? How much is this going to improve their experience? Is it going to transform their experience? Is it going to eliminate a minor annoyance? Things like that. Staff workflows and use by professionals. This was important because we had one member of our committee who worked in access services. So she was really able to provide the perspective of frontline staff. How are they using this site? How are they teaching users to use this site? And we were able to uncover additional issues looking at it from the perspective of staff workflows. And then timeline and difficulty of potential fixes really influenced whether we marked it as a high priority or a low priority issue. Okay, and then we brainstormed solutions. So there were multiple outcomes. So in some cases, we had already had a solution in mind before testing, and user testing really confirmed that that would be the right way to go. And that provided additional leverage for us to kind of present the evidence that we had data that proved that this would be what users would want and meet user needs. Sometimes we had been considering multiple solutions, and user testing helped us pick the best option. So it really helped our decision making in that way. In some cases, user testing uncovered additional issues that we hadn't anticipated, and then we had to review the issues again and kind of rethink our strategy and revise our recommendations accordingly. And then in some cases, we did brainstorm multiple solutions, and user testing indicated that there was potential for user enhancement, but didn't really help us pinpoint one best solution. So in those cases, we kind of noted everything, noted all the possible solutions, and then put it in a future recommendations report that will be revisited later. And then once we had this kind of tiered system of problems and solutions, we passed it on to our project leaders who reviewed the issues and decided where to route our requests. We were kind of in a unique situation because Lyrasis was our vendor, so there were two possible ways for us to kind of track our issues. So if it was a Yale-specific solution, we routed it through Basecamp, and if it was a core code contribution, something that, in our case, we mostly contributed accessibility issues. So if it was something that we thought really needed to be fixed in the core code, we submitted a JIRA ticket. Next, please. So how did usability testing actually affect the decisions that we were making? I have some before and after images that will go into more detail, but this chart just kind of gives you a summary. So for inherited scope and contents notes, like Alison and Eve mentioned, we did anticipate that this would cause confusion, and it did, but something that we thought of from a staff side of things is how inherited notes were affecting indexing, because the notes were being duplicated at each level, so it was potentially pushing not as relevant files and component records up further because of the way the text was being duplicated. So we considered that, and we decided to suppress them and then indicate that if they were ever unsuppressed, they should be labeled very clearly where the information was coming from, and they shouldn't be indexed so that that's not affecting search relevancy. Jargon and language issues, there were several things that we did anticipate, like container and box and finding aid, but there were also some things that we actually didn't anticipate. People were confused by the limit to collections function. They didn't understand what it did, and they saw the word limit, and they kind of thought, well, I want to see everything. I don't want to limit what I'm seeing. What does that mean? And they were also confused by subjects and names. They didn't know what they were, and they didn't understand where they came from. So that was something that we had anticipated that user testing really uncovered for us. Next. So contextual search results, like Eve said, we had anticipated this, and users had multiple suggestions for potential fixes, but we couldn't really pinpoint one solution that we thought would definitely be the best way to go. So we ended up lowering the prioritization and adding it to our future recommendations report. So this is an example where User testing indicated that users were interested in pursuing this further, but it's going to take a little more decision making and a little more development work to figure out exactly which way we want to go with that. And downloading structured data. This one is actually really interesting because we discussed this before testing, and at the time it would have required development work, so we kind of didn't really design the testing script to touch on that issue, and then it just shows how constantly evolving the landscape is. Now Harvard has actually developed that feature, so if we do decide to go down that route in the future, that might affect our prioritization, that now it doesn't require as extensive development work. So here are the before and after images. This was the front page before. You can see kind of the general layout of the page, and I'll point out that there are quite a few headings on the top banner. And then the after page. This is the after. The most obvious thing is obviously that we added Yale identifiable branding, but we also simplified the top bar and we took out a lot of the headings that users were confused by. We added a help page with specific explanations of a lot of the things that confused users in user testing. We switched where the search bar was on the page. We had initially had it at the bottom, and users actually said, well, if I'm going to be using this to search and discover, I want the search bar to be the first thing that I see. So we did that. They wanted us to simplify the intro text a little bit and add more information about requesting, because for them, they're constantly thinking, okay, how am I actually going to get my hands on this material? So we added a little more detail about that. And then these links at the bottom, I just want to point out, like Eve mentioned, the university-wide accessibility policy. So if you click on the accessibility link, it actually takes you to the university policy. So if people are wondering if our site is compliant or if they're concerned about using Screen Reader, they can get more information there. And then the hashtag Yale Archives. Before testing, we had discussed adding elements of visual interest, like maybe images or data visualization for, here are the 5 newest collections or something to draw an interest. But users actually said that they really liked the simplicity of the main page as it was. So we decided to maintain that and add that hashtag, which is actually an Instagram feed using that hashtag. So if you are interested in seeing images from the collections and you want that visual interest element, you can click that. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And we probably wouldn't have had that insight if we hadn't done usability testing. So that was really valuable. Next, please. So this is jargon and language. I'm not sure how clear the text is, but you can see that there's an inherited collection level scope and description note, scope and content note, and there's also an inherited language note, which is potentially confusing. And then the after, we basically suppress those. Oh wait, no, this isn't inherited. This is jargon. So we basically changed some of the jargon. We changed collection organization to finding aid view because, like Eve said, people are looking for the words finding aid, and that view is the closest thing to a conventional finding aid. So if people are really looking for that, they can click that, and they're kind of expecting, they understand what they're getting. And then the issue with container and box, people don't know what a container inventory is, but if they see the word list, it kind of clicks for them, oh, this must be the same thing as a box list. Container must mean box. So that helps them kind of bridge that gap. And then in the right pane, we changed collection organization to navigate the collection because people didn't really understand what to use that for, and phrasing it as navigate the collection is kind of telling them what to do. You can use this to navigate, so then it becomes a lot clearer. Okay, if I want to navigate, I can go over to this side of the page and do that. Okay, now scope and contents. So the inherited scope and language notes are confusing because they don't apply at this level of description, and then we changed it to basically suppress those notes. But we also tried to think about the underlying issues that were causing that confusion. So we decided to increase the prominence of the title, so it's a lot clearer if you click in at the folder level what you're actually looking at. You're looking at a file of correspondence. And we also made the breadcrumbs on the top of the page much more pronounced. Hopefully, if you come in at the file level and you don't quite understand what you're looking at, or you want to find the collection, it's much easier to follow the breadcrumb trail and say, okay, this is in this collection. I'm going to click on that and get the information instead of having it be inherited. So hopefully this will mitigate some of that confusion. So some of our challenges. The interface was in a constant state of active development, so things were constantly changing, and our review process became very iterative as a result. We weren't just doing one review. We were constantly realizing that something had changed and we'd have to go back and kind of review it all over again. Sometimes there were partial solutions patched through that didn't quite align with what we had in mind, and we had to review them, make sure that it was resolving the issue, make sure that it wasn't creating additional issues, and decide whether we were happy with that change or whether we wanted to ask for more. We had a particular issue with CSS changes causing bugs, so we had to kind of trace which changes were causing which bugs. And then maintaining project documentation. These were all of the platforms that we were working on over the course of a year. So that's quite a lot of balls in the air and a lot to keep track of. So sometimes it was difficult to remember where you had left a comment or interpret something that you had written months ago. So that would be our recommendation to you if you're in a similar situation, to really take detailed notes and take a lot of screenshots and annotate the screenshots if you have to, because the interface isn't going to look like that forever, and sometimes we would find a note and not remember what the site had looked like then. And so that would have been really helpful for us to mitigate that challenge. Okay, so our next steps. Our work group has prioritized our remaining recommendations and compiled a report. And there will be future iterative testing managed by YAMS, which Eve is co-chairing. And we've shared the usability and accessibility report to the ArchivesSpace listserv. We've also hosted our code on GitHub. And we submitted JIRA tickets for our core code contributions. And these were just some of the ways that we found really helpful in kind of utilizing the resources of the ArchivesSpace community. No one needs to reinvent the wheel. We can all share resources and documentation. We can reach out and see what other institutions are doing, ask questions, and hopefully really get a dialogue going about some of the interface changes. So this is just a list of resources, the next slide. And these are all on the Google Drive at the bit.ly, but these are some of the resources that you might find helpful in reviewing our project. And thank you very much.